Hi everyone, my name is Shorey Elhami and I'm the GIS Corps founder. GIS Corps is a program of URISA, Urban and Regional Information System Association, and it's a volunteer program that is run by volunteers. Our main mission is coordinating short-term volunteer GIS services to communities in need worldwide. The business of GIS Corps is run by what we call a core committee. And currently we have 7 members on the core committee. Myself, and I'm out of Ohio, Diane Haley, Calgary, Canada, Alan Ibaugh, Florida, Carol Kramer, Georgia, German Whitley, Oregon, Leslie Zolman, Montana, and Dave Hansen in California. I'm mentioning these names because it really matters that every one of these people who put their heart and soul into making GIS Corps happen is critical. I care the most about them and as colleagues and as people who care and make GIS Corps a successful organization. Also, it's really important for everyone, I think, to know that we're everywhere. I mean, we're all around United States and, of course, with Diane being in Canada. And how we get together is always through virtual meetings. The exception is the annual meetings that we hold, and it's the face-to-face meeting. I wanted to share with you a little bit of GIS Corps' history. The idea was proposed it was in October of 2001. I remember that I was at URISA conference in Long Beach when I started talking to colleagues about GIS Corps, and 2 years fast forward to October of 2003, URISA adopted the GIS Corps officially as a program. Since then, it's been almost 15 years, and we have launched 229 missions. The very last one actually just 2 nights ago, and those missions have been in 71 countries all around the world. We're really proud of our incredible volunteers. I mean, they have collectively contributed over 64,000 volunteer hours to these 229 missions, and that's incredibly exceptional. Also, as far as the volunteer count goes, we have consistently grown from year to year, and as you can see with the start of GIS Corps officially in 2003 at 41 volunteers, we now have over 5,200 volunteers and over 2,700 registered friends. Friends are whom we call friends of GIS Corps are those that log into our website and provide very minimal information. And as a result, we don't bombard people with a lot of emails and news. It's really they're signing up for the newsletter, which we publish on a quarterly basis. As I mentioned, volunteers are all over the globe, and this map actually shows you the location of the volunteers. You can log into our website and see these interactive maps, explore it, click on any of those circles, and you can see how many volunteers come from which countries, and which is 133 countries. As far as our missions, the 229 missions, again, you can see them starting in 2004 to 2017, the number of projects as well as number of volunteers. You'll see some spikes in number of volunteers in some years, and that's actually a lot of it has to do with a lot of crowdsourcing projects that we started to get involved with in 2010 when crowdsourcing actually became a thing, and to 2017 last year when we had the largest number of volunteers deployed to a project in Democratic Republic of Congo. To these 229 volunteers, we have deployed 1,644 volunteers, and those come from 71 countries. Again, a map of where the missions are located. I encourage you, again, check our website, because once again, when you click on any of these locations, you will read more about each one of those missions, and there is a link to a story, because every one of our missions has a story attached to it. We basically ask our volunteers to submit a report, and that's what those stories are about, and will help you get a much better grasp on what our missions look like and what are they all about. I also wanted to share with you that our volunteers get involved in both disaster response and non-disaster response projects. And as you can see, 94 of our projects have been in response to disasters, all the way from our very first disaster response project, post the Asian tsunami, all the way, and then Katrina shortly thereafter, to the latest floods, cyclones, and hurricanes that we had in 2017. So we get this question quite a bit, and people are wondering how we do what we do. And so I thought to share a couple of slides from two different perspectives. One of them is from the core committee and partner agency perspective. And partner agency is whom we work with, all the agencies that request volunteers from us. And generally speaking, the core committee has the following responsibilities. One of the first ones is to screen agencies that request volunteers from us, because we want to make sure that their mission is consistent with GIS Corps' mission. Shortly after we are done screening the agencies, we set up a call and start discussing the project with the partner agency. And it's always after that conversation that we develop a job description so that we can get started with recruitment. After the recruitment, email is sent out to qualified volunteers, and we have received responses from the volunteers. We start evaluating resumes to find the best match for a project. At that point, we provide the short list or the final volunteers to the partner agency to make a final decision. And actually, sometimes they ask us to make a final decision for them, and we've done both of those. It's at that point, and after that final decision is made, that we put the volunteer in contact with the partner agency. At that point, we kind of take a step backwards, and we say that you're now in direct contact with one another. And we do, however, check on the project, both with the partner agency and the volunteer on a monthly basis. We monitor the progress, and at the end of the project, we evaluate the outcome by sending them feedback forms and also rewarding the volunteers with GSP letters and also certificates. Another set of questions about how we work is listed here. A lot of people or volunteers, prospective volunteers, have asked us what kind of qualifications are needed to become a GIS Corps volunteer. We basically, as far as qualifications go, we work with volunteers of all kinds of levels of expertise, but it is after the call goes out to the volunteers, it is always going to those whose qualifications meet the job description. And how we know so much about the volunteers is as a result of a volunteer registration form that we ask them to fill out. And it's a pretty lengthy, actually, form, for good reasons, because all the questions that they answer helps us to select the best and most qualified volunteers. As far as duration of missions go, it actually very much widely varies, because we've had projects as short of an afternoon, with mostly training, to as long as 3 to 6 months. It is short term though, but like I said, it has happened that in exceptional projects that the volunteer just happened to be available and the project was more long term than usual. As far as software and hardware goes, we generally ask the volunteers to provide their own hardware and software. But as I will cover later on, just most recently as end of last year, we entered into a collaborative effort with Esri, and now we can provide Esri software to our volunteers through a program called GIS Service Pledge Program. Where do our volunteers go, and where are the projects located? Projects are everywhere, but where the volunteer can actually take care of the project can either be from home or office, and or projects can be on site. At the beginning, when we started GIS Corps, the majority of our projects actually were on site, but as technology improved, it actually flip-flopped, and the majority of our projects right now are virtual, and volunteers can work on the projects from the comfort of their home and sometimes from their offices. Another question that we get is regarding funding. GIS Corps doesn't pay for any volunteers' expenses. Obviously, for virtual projects, there is no expense involved, but for on-site projects, since we don't have the funding to pay for the volunteers' expenses, mostly for airfare, accommodation, or meals, we always make sure that the partner agency that is requesting the volunteer will be covering those costs. So as far as results goes, as I touched on briefly, we do expect a summary report at the end of the project, and sometimes it's written by volunteer and sometimes by the partner agency, but in most cases it's a collaborative effort. The areas that we provide services, GIS services, are in humanitarian relief, human rights, disaster response, conservation, wildlife protection, environmental quality and protection, GIS education, and that can be K-12 or higher education, health and human services, and also expert crowdsourcing. Our volunteers have areas of expertise in any and all fields of GIS, from conducting needs assessment, strategic planning, to spatial modeling, spatial analysis, remote sensing, conducting training, technical workshops. We have lots of volunteers who are experts in building databases, geodatabases, either creating them, designing them, cleansing them, and also developing web applications and story maps. Our volunteers have done a lot of geocoding projects, and also basic data entry, digitizing, either through crowdsourcing projects or otherwise, is what our volunteers get involved with quite a bit. And as I touched on earlier, the skill level varies, but we have from students to retired GIS professionals, professors, and so on. Common software programs that we use, the GIS Corps Core Committee uses, in many cases and many projects, we also assist with projects, every suite of software, QGIS, OSM, OpenStreetMap, using JASM or other editors. We use Python, JavaScript, R for statistics, and for communication with our volunteers, we use Google's G Suite quite a bit, Skype, Slack, Zoom. We use Podio as well, have used Lumio in collaboration with other volunteer organizations and Basecamp. I'd like to now turn to our recent missions and speak to some of the more recent missions that we've had. Obviously, us having over 220 projects, we're not going to be able to cover them, but I thought at least we could touch on 4 different categories, starting with disaster response, switching over to spatial analysis, projects that we've used ArcGIS Online or AGO, and then some of the crowdsourcing projects that we have been involved with. So starting with disaster response and some of the more recent ones, as recent as last year's series of hurricanes and flooding that we had, I wanted to share one that we actually worked on in Fort Bend County, Texas, just outside Houston. And the task for this project was to record real-time road closures. We had 23 volunteers who contributed 379 hours to this project, digitizing road closures, and they did the work on ArcGIS Online. The next one, which was actually a series of projects that we worked on for Maria, was with another nonprofit organization called Standby Task Force for a FEMA project. As part of that project, which 29 volunteers got involved and contributed 200 hours, the volunteers ended up doing data mining, image assessment, and basically it was in collaboration with SBTF, as I mentioned, Standby Task Force. And I should mention that both SBTF and us, GIS Corps, and quite actually few other nonprofit organizations, we are members of another organization called Digital Humanitarian Network, or DHN, that from time to time calls for members to assist in disaster, primarily in disaster, but we've had some other exceptions. We get involved in a lot of OpenStreetMap, humanitarian OpenStreetMap projects, and we always have our ears and eyes open for active tasks, for active disasters that are happening around the world. And these are a couple of screenshots on our volunteers' efforts post Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and 2 earthquakes in Mexico, and 1 at the border of Iran and Iraq. Collectively, we had 70 volunteers who contributed over 500 hours into these projects, which mainly was digitizing and validating. That's important, I think, to mention, because validation of the work that is done on OSM is important, very important to HOT, of course, but also because our volunteers are GIS experts, their validation, the quality of their validation is sought by humanitarian OpenStreetMap. Switching to spatial analysis, again, I have a few examples. This one was in India, and the task was about digitizing rooftops for rainwater collection. And then it was an organization, nonprofit organization called Sustainable Innovation. The idea was to get an idea about the square meter of the roof coverage so that they can calculate the amount of rain that could be harvested from the rooftops. 6 volunteers, including 4 students, contributed to this project. They worked on OpenStreetMap, ArcGIS Online, and they used ArcGIS Desktop. Those 4 students actually were from Miami University in Ohio. The second project that involved spatial analysis, and in this case, site optimization analysis, was done by one of our volunteers who contributed about 96 hours to this project. The problem to solve was to find the best locations to locate the new office for the Girl Scouts of Northern Illinois. And this site optimization analysis resulted in identifying 6 potential sites, which helped them immensely in locating the site where they had the best and access to the largest number of their customers. This is an example of a GIS needs assessment project with FIFO, which is an organization in Costa Rica, and also a great example of an on-site project. Our volunteer, Dick Topish from Cleveland, Ohio, ended up being deployed to this project. He spent about a couple of weeks there, 177 hours, because he also put some hours into the project after he returned. And this was in collaboration with USFS and their international program division. What's really nice about this project, and we actually really emphasize and care about for all of our projects, is that after the volunteer came back, not only did he keep contact with the organization, but also he helped recruit another volunteer as a result of a need that he detected, which was delivering ArcGIS Online modules in Spanish. And that volunteer also concluded his work several months ago. So now they have access to a series of recordings, which is also available on our website for Spanish speakers. And these 2 projects actually helped FIFO quite a lot. Now switching to ArcGIS Online projects. And we've done quite a few story maps, and this one was the very first one for Worldwide Fund for Nature in South Africa. And beautifully enough, that was the beginning of our work with WWF, because we did another one in Zambia after this, and one more is also underway. 2 volunteers contributed to this project. Over 300 hours was contributed because, and I encourage you to check out this story map, because it was quite an involved story map that had quite a few other story maps in its belly, so to speak. So that was a very successful story map project that we had. Another one was to build actually an ArcGIS Online portal, and that was for Feeding America. Again, a nonprofit, US-based nonprofit organization out of Riverside, San Bernardino. And they were not familiar with AGO. We basically helped set up their site, and we worked on a number of web maps and apps and story maps for them, which is accessible from their AGO public library, gallery rather. Again, 2 volunteers worked on this project and contributed about 150 hours to this project. Last series of missions I wanted to share with you are crowdsourcing, and we call them actually expert crowdsourcing. And one of them started with an organization, nonprofit again, called Uncultivated Earth. What the idea was they came to us because they wanted to test Esri's geoform, but they weren't sure if it would make the impact that they had anticipated. Their main objective was to support local food production, and then so they targeted a small number of users, and which was 16 volunteers of ours who contributed about 65 hours to these projects, used the geoform, and then as a result, it equipped them with further fine-tuning the geoform and making their work more meaningful and more impactful. The second crowdsourcing project I wanted to share with you was one of the largest one that we had, and it was mainly about digitizing structures for polio vaccination campaign. It was in collaboration with the World Health Organization and Center for Disease Control, and it was held in Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. The project took about 6 weeks from start to finish, and it took about 20 days of digitizing. 280 volunteers contributed over 5,000 hours to this project, and they managed to digitize 750,000 structures in the areas suspected to have cases of polio. That resulted in printing over 10,000 maps, and as a result, over 120,000 children under 5 were vaccinated. I should mention that we actually had 3 separate mapathons over the course of last year, and volunteers collectively in those 3 separate mapathons have digitized 1.2 million structures in DRC and Somalia, both in support of polio eradication initiative of WHO and CDC. At the end, I wanted to mention the GIS Service Pledge Program that I mentioned at the beginning of talk. As I mentioned, it is a new program, and it was launched in December of 2017. The idea here is that if any of the volunteers have a project that they are passionate about and they believe that it makes a difference in their community, we would make a free copy of ArcGIS Home Use License available to them. And the way to apply is very simple. You can log into the URL that is posted on this slide. Since we have launched the program, we've had 24 volunteers all over the world. I zoomed into the North America here, but they're all over the world and in other continents as well. How to get involved, which is exactly what we want you to, is if you want to become a volunteer or become involved as a friend of GIS Corps, go to our website at www.giscorps.org and click on Get Involved, and you'll find different ways to contribute your GIS expertise. And there's some shortcuts also on the top of the website for people who are interested in becoming a volunteer, or for partner agencies that are interested in requesting volunteers. And again, on our homepage, we have a link to the Service Pledge Program. So if, again, you have a worthy project and you'd like to request a copy of the software, please do so by clicking on that link. And we should mention that becoming a friend of GIS Corps or even a volunteer does not connotate a commitment per se, because we always ask even volunteers when they are qualified for a project, it is an option that they have. It isn't that if they put their name in the database, they would have to go somewhere or do something right away. They always have an option to opt in or opt out. And also, everyone who signs up as a volunteer or friend of GIS Corps will receive the quarterly newsletter and announcements that we send from time to time. And if they are a target for a recruitment, of course, they receive emails of that nature. And also, I wanted to encourage you that if you're not following us on Twitter, please do so. And on Facebook, also please join our group. And also on LinkedIn, we are involved and we are active in all of those platforms. At the end, I really leave this slide for everyone because it speaks to why we do what we do. And it also speaks to the fact that volunteers do not ask why volunteer, but rather when should we do it, where and how, and we truly believe in that. I want to thank you for your time. And I hope that you consider joining as a volunteer, or if you are a partner agency and listening to this webinar, I hope that you request volunteers so we can go back to our database and make those volunteers available to you. Thank you very much for your time, and check our website, once again, www.giscorps.org for more information. Thank you very much.